Central Bank of Nigeria is insisting that old Naira notes will cease to be legal tender in the country from the 1st of February as the January 31st date set for return of old notes to remain sacrosanct. CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele rather urged those who might still be holding on to the old notes to turn them in, assuring them that they will not be harassed by anti-graft agencies. Emefiele also addressed some controversies surrounding the Apex Bank. Arise correspondent Amaka Ode-Walker reports.
I must say here that unfortunately I don't have good news for those who feel that we should shift the deadline.
Despite calls from the National Assembly and other pressure groups across the country for the extension of the deadline in view of some challenges, especially the non-availability of the new Naira notes in banks, as well as automated teller machines, and with the January 31st deadline barely 7 days away, the central bank governor drops the bombshell: no going back. Emefiele says those who have the old notes had enough time to take them to the bank or swap them for the new ones within the time frame, but refused to do so. He also explains that the Apex Bank has so far mopped up about 1.5 trillion naira, while hoping to achieve about 2 trillion naira before the deadline.
For us, 90 days, in fact, we feel it's 100 days is enough for anybody who has money or the old currency to deposit the money in the banks.
President Muhammadu Buhari held in December written to the Senate requesting an approval to the restructure of 23.7 trillion naira ways and means advances given to the federal government by the Central Bank of Nigeria. Questions had been raised about the section of the CBN Act which provides that the government should not borrow more than 5% of the previous budget. Emefiele provides clarity on the need for securitization as requested by President Buhari.
We feel as CBN, because we are a lender of last resort, that it will be irresponsible for us to sit idle. It will be a dereliction in our responsibility and duties as lender of last resort to ignore the government and allow the economy and our Nigerians to suffer.
House of Representatives member Mohammed Kazaure had raised the alarm over an alleged theft of stamp duty proceeds running into 89 trillion naira. He had alleged that the Apex Bank had not remitted stamp duty revenues to government coffers as tax, insisting that the CBN remitted only 60% to the government while 40% goes to private pockets. Emefiele responds.
Total stamp duty collected from 2016 to date in our record, and we the banks have signed on their headed paper how much they've collected, because this is public accounts. We owe Nigerians accountability. Is 370 billion 686 million 315,505 naira 28 kobo. Out of that, FIRS has disbursed through FAC, or Ministry of Finance has disbursed to FAC, 226 billion 451 million 720,158 naira 88 kobo. And the balance in the account in CBN is 144 billion 234 million 595,346 naira 40 kobo.
Amaka Ode-Walker, Arise News.
But the National Assembly is calling on the central bank to extend the deadline for deposit of old Naira notes by 6 months. Georgina Ndekwe Ezeyaka reports.
Since the 15th of December 2022, when the Central Bank of Nigeria released into circulation the redesigned 200, 500 and 1,000 Naira notes for public use, there has been public outcry regarding the shortage of the new notes. With just few days left to the January 31st deadline, when the old notes will cease to be a legal tender, banks and automated teller machines are still dispensing old notes to customers despite the CBN's directive. The National Assembly is unhappy with this development, and the federal lawmakers are insisting that the January 31st deadline is unrealistic. But the CBN says the deadline remains.
There is no enough new notes in circulation. And in fact, the banks ATMs that should be dispensing new notes are still dispensing only the old notes. And citizens still have a lot of old notes that they are unable to deposit in the banks.
Some of the lawmakers say the CBN governor should respect and comply with the resolutions of the National Assembly for the deadline to be extended by 6 months from the 31st of January to the 31st of July 2023.
There is a need for the CBN to look away from the elections, because everything about this is about the election. Look away from the election. Look at the issue of the ordinary people.
Forget catching any big man. The problem is with the smallholder, with our small traders, who now, because what it's going to do is going to affect general commerce in the country.
A lone voice, Senator Sam Egu from Ebonyi State, opposed the resolution, saying the culture of hoarding Naira notes needs to be stopped.
If we cannot extend it, I want to assure you that there's no time we will reach and we say we are satisfied. So I want to oppose this motion. I want to stand with the CBN that the argument they have enunciated is good enough.
The National Assembly also urged the CBN governor to compel the banks to exchange old notes for new ones in consideration of financially excluded Nigerians.
We must have a policy of inclusion, getting our people who have no banks available to them to have banks available in whatever way possible.
Lawmakers say currencies in other countries are phased out gradually and not forced out, as the CBN is trying to do, hence the need for the resolutions of the National Assembly to be complied with.
For the past almost 10 years, my constituency is running without a single bank branch of any bank in my constituency. So people transact, do their activities, do their business, trading, and anything you can think of in cash.
Certain things should have been in place before the policy was rolled out, as good as the policy is.
The House of Representatives, on its part, later resolved to invite the CBN governor and bank managing directors to explain the claims and counterclaims of hoarding and availability or otherwise of the new Naira notes. Georgina Ndukwizainka, Arise News.
Right, Aya, let's go straight to it.
Yes, straight. A number of things to discuss. I'll just focus on the redesign. I mean, yesterday ended the 2-day Monetary Policy Committee meeting, and on the back of that, the CBN Governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, had used the opportunity to brief Nigerians as to the sacrosanctity of the 31st of January deadline of the redesigning of the notes, and the fact that the 200 Naira, the old 200 Naira, 500 Naira, and 1,000 Naira notes will no longer be used as legal tender. Now, following the first time this was announced by the CBN governor in October of 2022, there have been a number of back and forth. There have been a number of arguments for and arguments against. The CBN governor has indeed been asked, should I use the word summoned, to face the National Assembly to explain and brief the National Assembly, the House, as to why the decision and the length of time that's been given for this decision. He didn't appear, even though his deputy, one of his deputy governors, Mrs. Aisha Ahmed, had gone and gave a detailed brief to the National Assembly as to the reason behind the policy and also to explain how this will work out. Right from the very beginning, Rufai, the conversation has been around the fact that whilst the policy is good, and as mentioned by the a number of senators and House of Assembly members, there's no contention as to, I don't think there's been a lot of contention as to whether the policy is good or not. It's not illegal. It's within the remit of the CBN governor, backed by the CBN Act. Therefore, it's not, the argument from time has not been about how good the policy is. It has consistently been about the timing and the readiness of the CBN and deposit money banks to adhere to the 31st of January deadline. Now, going back to the reason why the redesign was necessary, according to the CBN governor, I'll quote him when he first announced this. He said that he cited money hoarding, inflation, saying that currently there was 85% of the total money in circulation was outside the bank vaults. They needed to mop and have control of, at least have a control of the money in circulation in the nation. And then also he talked about even even using it to starve criminals like kidnappers, bandits who would ask for ransom. Thank you, ransom, to starve them of cash, because if they know that there's no cash, the level of cash in circulation is not a lot, then they're not able to get the money that they would. So let's look at the arguments against. We said it before that if the CBN was going to have this kind of policy, particularly with such a tight deadline, then there ought to have been sensitization, particularly as the House members have cited, men and women, Nigerians living in rural areas. The CBN has heeded to that call, but unfortunately, despite the CBN governor saying they gave 100 days notice to Nigerians, it is not sufficient enough. They just started the cash swap program just recently. Why didn't that start immediately this policy was announced? Why didn't they put that as a plan when the policy was announced? They also talked about the fact that they were going into markets to sensitize traders as to the fact that these new notes, to show them the new notes, because we heard stories of traders refusing to collect the money. Bus conductors refusing to collect the new notes because they were not aware about the new notes. So these are some of the concerns. It's good that the CBN has now responded. They said earlier on that they were going to listen to the concerns of Nigerians and make adjustments where applicable. However, the CBN governor has come out now to say that there's no going back, there's no shifting, there's no moving on this 31st of January deadline. So the advice to Nigerians is go, if you have old Naira notes with you, please go out there and deposit before the 31st of January and avoid the rush. Banks are going to be open on weekends as well to ensure, to accommodate, the people who are going to have to deposit the money, money. Then on the hand of the CBN, the encouragement and the advice is to take this message to the hinterlands. Thankfully, they said that, with the cash swap program, they're going to be able to exchange in these areas of the unbanked. But it's very important that Nigerians are not excluded and people don't lose money, and the most vulnerable in society are not the most affected.
Dr. Abati?
Well, there were many issues raised by the central bank governor yesterday after the 289th meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee. And they issued, after that meeting, communique number 146. So what the CBN governor was addressing, the issues that arose from that particular meeting. But first, let me take some of the other issues. I know Naira redesign and deadline extension is the big issue. Now, while the CBN governor was briefing the press yesterday, he made a point about securitization of the money, ways and means, over 22 trillion lent to the federal government of Nigeria, which had been a big issue. And he made a point that the central bank has not done anything illegal with regard to performing its function as a lender of last resort. Of course, that's part of the definition of central banking. But the CBN governor's attention, we need to be drawn to the law. This morning I read a copy of the letter sent to the Senate by Tilewa Adebajo, who is a financial expert. And he pointed out that the Senate or the National Assembly of Nigeria, in discussing this proposal for securitization, should pay attention to Section 38(3)(a) of the CBN Act, which says that, look, all advances have to be paid by the end of the federal government financial year. You can't carry it forward. You can't carry it to the next financial year. He also quoted Section 38(3)(b) of the CBN Act, which says you cannot address those advances to the federal government either by way of promissory bills or by way of securitization. In other words, it will amount to a violation of the law. This whole talk about securitization or, issuance of treasury bills, I think it's important to make that point. The other law that has been violated is the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So the question is not about the function of the central bank. Yes, but has the threshold been exceeded as prescribed under the Fiscal Responsibility Act? Has there been a violation as stated in the enabling law of the CBN itself? That's one. The other germane issue that the CBN governor tried to address has to do with stamp duty. There had been this allegation on the table that the CBN would seem to have made away with about 89 trillion of stamp duty. But he pointed out during the media briefing that, look, if you look at the stamp duty of Nigeria since 2016, it's just about 387 billion and not more than that from what they've been able to check in collaboration with the banks. And that in any case, in terms of the capacity of the banks, the entire banking system in Nigeria is worth just about 49 trillion. So where would the 89 trillion come from? I think it's important that he also addressed that. But in this particular case, he says that the CBN is going to engage independent auditors to take a look at stamp duty. So we expect that those independent auditors will either confirm what the CBN governor has said or give us figures that are different. But the basic figure that he gave out should be of serious attention to persons who have raised issues about stamp duty. But the audit that the CBN governor talked about should not just be with regard to stamp duty. It should be with regard to the CBN's own financials. I think many Nigerians would like to see, published accounts of the CBN. More so, as the CBN governor was saying, look, we are accountable to the public and we are transparent in our operations. That should be proven, by publishing the audited reports. Now, the third thing that, the CBN governor addressed has to do with the decision of the Monetary Policy Committee. 12 members voted, to act on that. Well, one member wanted the MPR increased by 150 basis points. 4 members wanted it increased by, 50 basis points. 70 members of the MPC wanted it increased by 100 basis points. At the end of the day, it was the 100 basis points that was chosen. So the MPR moved from 16.5% to 17.5%. All other rates, the liquidity ratio, the cash reserve ratio, the asymmetric corridor were retained. But what is the main argument of the CBN? The moderation, the slight moderation that we saw in December in the inflation rate from 21.47 coming down to 21.34% is not enough for monetary policy to be held or, for it to be reduced. Rather, what will be required is further tightening. The indication of that is that the CBN, the MPC, the Monetary Policy Committee, is certainly not sure that that moderation that we saw in inflation rate in December, will be sustained. And so they've done further tightening in recognition of headwinds that were further defined in that communique that was issued. But the question is, what is the implication? And we're likely to see the implication in terms of the performance of the equities market. Investors are likely to hedge their bets and move away from the stock market. And many investors who have commented on this, they've expressed worry. But of course, the CBN, the Monetary Policy Committee, is trying to be cautious in this regard. And finally, the issue of the extension of deadline, which is of interest. Well, the CBN governor says 90 days is enough. That's what the CBN Act states. But the question to ask is, what is the best practice in other parts of the world? Many have cited the example of England, where, when they change currency, they give you up to about a year so that there will be convenience. But here in Nigeria, the CBN governor says measures have been taken. Banks were to open on Saturdays. Well, those measures, I don't think they worked. Many banks did not open on Saturdays. The banks are the ones not making the new notes available because the CBN governor is saying those new notes are available. It's so bad now that, in fact, there was one wedding ceremony in Bako local government area of Niger State where the in-laws are saying you can't pay bride price with old notes. And I think that makes sense. Mm-hmm. If you want a new wife, then bring new things. Don't come and bring old notes, even if, that's on the jocular side. But that's how serious it is. Some supermarkets are no longer taking old notes. Everybody is asking for new notes that are not available. The irony of it, of course, is that what we're seeing here is the attitude of the average Nigerian. People were given 100 days, 90 days since October. Now, some newspapers are reporting this morning that there are long queues in the banks. We always wait till the last minute before we act. And as it was with the NIN, the National Identification Number, so it is with these old notes. Everybody is rushing now. One producer told me this morning that he had to use a bullion van to bring his 50,000 naira, and he will go to the bank to change and say, bullion van to carry 50,000 naira. But okay, I hope he gets new notes.
Okay, so real quickly, I want to just go to the arguments. This argument we all look of America, their currency and all of that, a valid argument. And we should stop making arguments like that. What's the logical, empirical rebuttal? This is it. Can you hold $100,000 in cash in your house in America? In the UK, can you hold $100,000 in cash? I'll give you an instance. Even in the UK, ordinary £50 notes, most places will not collect it from you. The best they will collect is £20. In fact, when you spend £50, they know that you're either just coming from abroad or, they'll have to call in for security checks. So there's too much money in circulation, and that's why we're doing this. And that's why you see monetary policies do not work. You're comparing yourself with America where monetary policies work. Hello? When the Fed gives a tightening, you see the knock-on effect on inflation. But the CBN has been struggling because it's difficult, because too much cash in the hands of people and politicians. Secondly, I'd like to ask, what's the role of the National Orientation Agency? Can you sell it to people so that we can do a better job? Because in all of this, nobody talks about the National Orientation Agency, which is to address people and tell them about the things government is doing, and the CBN. So what's the role of National Orientation Agency in all of this? Because we keep saying there was no sensitization. Please show me one ad bought by the National Orientation Agency. And I'm sure they have a budget for the activities too every year. So where does the money go? Anyway, that's a talk for another day. The third argument we make is the fact that, there are timelines. I'm happy Dr. Bati enunciated those arguments in the CBN Act by saying that it's what is in the Acts. So let's just follow the law, just like we should also follow the law of securitization and ways and means. The fourth argument I would like to also make is about stamp duties. Anyway, I had said it constantly on this show that those numbers were fictitious and were laughable. So are you saying that Nigeria collected close to half of its GDP in stamp duty? The entire banking asset is about 77 trillion. So obviously we know it was laughable. And when the CBN said they were going to get the big four auditors to check in, yes, they should get it to check in. Please, I think we should follow the deadline. It's for the best of the country, and we are seeing effects. I kept on making the argument on the show that if we don't see any knock-on effect as regards inflation, then probably the policy is not working. But now we've seen it trickling down. I know some people made other arguments, but we're seeing the effect on inflation, and it is time to start reining this in. As regards tightening, yes, that's the way to go when you have inflation. I'm not surprised 100 basis points is now the order of the day, 17.5%. Obviously, I think even the next MPC will still have to raise interest rates because we have to fight inflation that is over 21%, which is chaotic as we speak. So CBN is doing everything in line. But the only time we can make a grouse with all of what they have done is if we don't see results. Are inflation's number coming down? Yes. Are we having a knock-on effect on the economy? Yes. So we need to tighten the currency, and Nigeria should change the way and the approach they have to currency and stop making unfounded arguments like, in America, take $500,000 cash to the bank in America and see maybe people will not be called in, or 500 pounds cash to the bank in the UK and see people will not be called in. So the things they don't do in America, you do them here and you expect American rates to apply. Let's make better arguments.